Hello and welcome to the Behavior Research Challenge. In the previous videos, we looked at why behavioral issues occur. We also talked about the hidden triggers that drive behavior. In this video, we're going to be decoding the message beneath the behavior. This will help us to interpret the behavior correctly and be able to help the child deal with the behavior. We're going to do this using the ABC framework, and that's antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Before I proceed, there's an important point I want to highlight. Every time you're looking at a child's behavior, you must always look at it through the lens of the developmental age of the child. How do I mean? We have what we call the chronological age and the developmental age. Chronological age is the age of the child by birth. That means the child is 7 years by birth, for example. While the developmental age is the skill, the skill ability of the child. We have what we call developmental milestones. These are various pillars of development that we all have. We have the speech and language, cognition, motor skills, and we now have emotions and behavior as one of the developmental milestones. So most times, children with developmental delay, their chronological age most times does not correlate with their developmental age, meaning that a child that is 7-year-old, in terms of their behavior and emotions management or skill and ability, they may operate at the level of a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old. The age will not correlate. That means the developmental age and the chronological age. This is important because it helps us to set realistic expectations, because you cannot demand from a child what they do not have the ability to deliver. So a child operating at a lower developmental age may exhibit some behavior that may be inappropriate for their chronological age. However, because they are operating at a lower developmental age, we were able to put it in perspective. Now moving on to the ABC framework. I said the ABC framework has to do with A, representing antecedent, B, behavior, and C, consequence. We use this in order to interpret behavior correctly. How do we do this? B, like I said, is the behavior. Now the antecedent has to do with the events that occur before the behavior. It's important for us to identify the events occurring before the behavior, because this helps us to identify the triggers, understand what's causing it, and we are able to either eliminate the antecedent or modify the antecedent. And if we can modify the antecedent or eliminate it, that means that we are able to modify the behavior itself or even eliminate the behavior. So A is antecedent, B is the behavior, C is the consequence. That is what results after. So for example, I mentioned previously that there are several factors that could trigger behavior. We have external factors and we have internal factors. So I'll give an example of an external factor. Some children, they are sensitive to noise or light. So if a child suddenly starts exhibiting a behavior, you need to ask yourself, did anything change in the child's environment? Was there a sudden sound that came into the scene? Was there sudden exposure to light? That's an external factor that we need to consider. I'll tell you a story. I remember a few years ago, there was a video that went viral on the internet, and it showed a child that was in a store. And in the store, it was a gadget store where they sold, TV and lots of screens. So all we saw in the video was the child being destructive. The child was just smashing the TV, and that was all we saw. We didn't have much information. And of course, the internet went wild with people saying, "Oh, the child was not well behaved," and people speculating that maybe the child wanted something and the parents didn't give the child, and that's why the child was being destructive, and they needed to discipline the child and things like that. But being a special needs expert, I was able to, when I saw the video, some things struck me. First of all, a child is exhibiting a behavior. The first thing I'm thinking, what is this child trying to communicate? Because like I said, every behavior is a communication. So looking at that behavior, my first thought is, what is this child trying to communicate? What's going on with this child? Secondly, what could have precipitated or triggered this behavior? Then I looked closely I noticed that the kind of behavior the child was exhibiting looked like a meltdown. And one of the things that could be a trigger for meltdown is the external factor that I mentioned, light, sound. When I looked at the store where they were selling screens, lots of large TVs, most of these TVs are on. People that sell gadgets, they often put on the screen so that when clients come in, they can have an idea of what the gadget would look like when you purchase it. So lots of the screens were on. And knowing that screens can be a trigger. So what was running through my mind is this child is likely sensitive to the screens and is having a sensory overwhelm. So that means that the trigger for that meltdown is likely the exposure to the screen. Okay, of course I didn't have the full detail, but I believe I was able to at least interpret that behavior and think about it that way. In that situation, the antecedent for that behavior is the external factor of exposure to the screen, because the screen can be hyper stimulating for some children and trigger meltdown, and trigger behavioral issues. Another factor that I would like to talk about is an internal factor like hunger. So some children may exhibit behavior when they're hungry. But because most times the child may not have enough language to be able to communicate or express themselves. And I mentioned that if a child has difficulty in communication, behavior becomes the language they use in communicating. So sometimes if a child is tired or hungry, they may exhibit behavior. So how do we see this in some pictures? Sometimes some children, maybe in school settings, when the day is in the afternoon, they're having a long day, they may exhibit behavior, or even at home in the afternoon, and you notice that after the child has something to eat, the child is now calm. That is to tell you that the antecedent was the hunger, which is an internal factor. So if you are able to spot the antecedent that is the trigger, you are able to either modify it or prevent the behavior by meeting that need. So if you know that at certain times of the day, a child tends to be hungry because it's understandable their glucose level may be low and they may have had a long day in school, what do you do? Before the child gets to that point, you can make preparation where the child can have something to eat or have snacks. Or you can also, begin to teach the child that if they feel a certain way, they can have something to eat. So you make it accessible to them. In that case, for a child that is maybe tired, that's why the child is having the behavior. What do? You examine the schedule that they have in school. Is the child getting enough breaks, or can the child be getting some rest in between? So when it comes to behavior, the ABC framework says the antecedent look at the events that occurred before that behavior. So think about those events in terms of external factors and internal factors, depending on what we're dealing with. Was there a sudden change in the environment? Was there a sudden introduction of something new into the environment? Was there transitioning occur? Did the transition occur? Because transition, that means moving a child from one activity to another or from one location to another without adequate preparation can also trigger behavior. So whatever behavior you're seeing, think about the antecedent. What events occurred before that time? So remember, we talked about would have studied patterns. So if you notice the pattern of behavior, then try to examine the pattern of events that are occurring before that behavior. With that, you may be able to identify what is triggering the behavior. Then you can either eliminate the antecedent or modify it. That way, we're able to modify the behavior, or in some cases, eliminate the behavior, and that will give us like a different outcome. So that is the ABC framework. So if you are able to identify the antecedent, you're able to modify the behavior, then you have a different outcome. So in the next video, we proceed and talk more on how to respond rather than react to the behavior. I will see you then.